Hello, in this video I'm gonna work on creating forms in React using the state. We're gonna use the state basically because that's how we do it. Also, when let's say our form info, what we wanna fill is saved on a server, we usually load it from the server into our state, and from there we proceed to create our form. So I'm gonna be direct in the first form application. I'm gonna create a form using that only has text fields, and I'm gonna use Material UI as before. So the same concept applies to any library that you're using, and it can apply even if you're not using a library. So let's add some info in our state, and therefore we need to add a state in the first place. So let's create a state, and in our state, let's create the form that we want to fill. And since I'm creating a post on this page, I'm gonna call it post form. And inside this post form, I will have an author. I'm gonna call it post author. I also have a post title. Every post will have its own title, and it will have a body. So let's start with the author, and therefore I'll put the configuration that I want here. And in case I'm not using a UI library, I'll start with element type input, and I'll remove that later since we're using the Material UI, but I wrote it in case you're not using one. And then I'm gonna put some configuration for this element. So I'm gonna call it element config, and here it has a placeholder. I'm gonna call the placeholder for the author. I'm gonna fill it with this is my name, so it will display this is my name. And I will add a helper text. I'll use the helper text as a helper text and as a label. So, and I'll type here, enter your name. That's its config. I'll also add a default value. It will take the value of an empty string. And since I will be doing some multi-lines, I'll give this a number of rows that's 1. And I'm gonna keep the rest, the title and the body, for another stage. I'm gonna try to display this. I'm gonna try to get this to work in the beginning. So I'll also, before I move on, use here type and set it to text in case I'm not using the Material UI library, or I'm not using a library that deals with input. So if I'm doing things manually, I usually need to fill here the type and set it to text. So HTML would work, and the element type would be set to input. To display this, I need to have some sort of form that I will display under my title, and I've created a title here. Again, typography is from the Material UI. So let's create a variable and call it form, and we load the form underneath the typography. Let's create inside render a variable called form, and this variable will contain initially our form, but if we're submitting the form, we'll change it so that it displays a spinner, and therefore this form will have inside it a spinner. So let's start with the form, and inside this form I'll create a form element, and it will have an onSubmit method, which I'll fill later on. And inside this form I have a text field. The text field is from the Material UI. Again, I can use it from the Material UI, or I can create another input. It will be a self-closing element. We have nothing inside it for now. The text field is designed to take some props by by the material UI. So if I explore the text field here and I want one with an outline, so I'll take this one, it's full width and it's outlined. So I'll copy these and put them here. I'll fill these in a bit. I need them to take their values from the state. And before the form variable, I'll create an array. I'll create a const and call it form elements array. And I will load this array inside my form. And this array will take its values from the state. So inside this array, I'm going to take every object in past form and push it to this array. So let's take 4, and here we'll take every element in the past form. We'll call it key. So for let key in this dot state dot past form, and here we'll take it and push it to our form elements array. So form elements array dot push. What am I gonna push? I'm gonna push as an ID my key, and that is past author, and inside it I'm gonna push the rest. So I'm gonna call it config, and here I push this dot state dot past form of key. I'll take the other values and push them into config. Of course, this can be done in other ways. So for now, I have a text field inside my form. It's not affected by the values that I have in my state, in my array. And I need to take, therefore, the form elements array, which has all the fields in my state, and map it into text fields. So I'll cut this. I'll take form elements array, and I'll map it to form element, and here using an arrow function, I'll map it to text fields. So every element in this array, that is the author, the title, and the body, will become a text field here. So it will be mapped into a text field, and instead of filling the text field again, I'll just paste what I cut previously. Again, here we notice that my editor imported text field automatically. You can also import it manually, and you can import it in 2 ways here. So you can import it like it did, or you can use this way. They'll work, both of them will work. So let's tidy this a bit. And here inside the text field, since I'm taking every element and mapping it into a text field, I load the properties from this element. So instead of ID, I'll have key, and it will take form element dot ID. So it will take the ID of this form element. The style will stay as it is. For now, I'll do without a label. We'll return to the label in a bit. For the placeholder, it won't stay placeholder. Instead, I'll take form element, and in this element, since I loaded everything from this element into config, I loaded all of these into config here when I was pushing into my array. So here I take config, and then I want to take the info in the placeholder and load it. So inside config, I have the placeholder, which is inside element config. So config element config dot placeholder. And here I put an extra bracket. For the helper text, it's also at the same level as placeholder, and therefore I'll take my element, form element, I'll take its config. Inside config, I'll take element config dot helper text. I'll keep it full width. I can make this, I can change this, but for now I'll keep it full width. I'll keep these as they are, and I'll keep the variant as outlined. I'll remove the unsubmit just not to get compile errors for now. And if I load my page now, I can see that I've created this field and I have this as my helper text. And I can take this field and instead of helper text, change it to label. And now if I reload, it's up here. So I can do either way, they're both correct. And now I need to load the other fields as well. So let's add them. I have, in addition to the author, I have post title, and inside the title, I can also type element type input, or since I'm sticking with Material UI, I can remove the two of them. So I'll go directly into element config. It's similar to these. Again, I can remove the type text because in Material UI, this is already known. I'm using a text field. And here in the placeholder, I'll maybe for the title choose the cool post as a suggestion. And in the helper text, I'll type choose something catchy. And I can, in fact, have one field for the helper text and one for the label. So let's do it this way. So label is name, and here label is title. And do not forget the comma. And then I'll use for the label, and for the helper text, helper text. And now I have both. I have the label and the helper text. And let's add also for the post title a default value that's initially an empty string, and it's of one row. We'll see how to make multiple rows as well. And in fact, this should be here. And I still have the body, so post body. And let's copy this inside the post body. I'll type here body text, and in the placeholder, let's say I want to say, and here express yourself. And I want this to be of 5 rows, so I'll set rows to 5. But if I look at it and I refresh it, it's still 1 row. Therefore, here I need to change a few things. I need to add multi-line, and I need to tell it the number of rows. So I type rows equal form element dot config, and it's not inside element config, so I'll type rows directly. And now if I look at it, it took multiple rows. So this is good enough, this looks good enough, but it's not designed to update the value when I change these. Its value will stay an empty string. So if I submit my post, I'll submit empty strings. I'll need therefore an unchange handler. I need therefore to type unchange, and here I'll create an input changed handler. I'll pass my event where the change is happening to this dot input changed handler, and here it takes 2 arguments, the event and the ID of the element that I'm working in. And one advantage of using the state for forms is writing one input handler. We don't have to write multiple input handlers for every element. So let's work with our input handler. Let's set our input handler before continuing. Before the render method, after the state, I'll use an input changed handler. I'll define it here. It takes an event and an input identifier, and I'm using arrows here, arrow functions, and my input identifier is in fact the element ID. I'm passing my ID, my form element ID, as an input identifier. And to see what's happening, I'll just log for now input identifier in addition to the event target value. So event.target.value. If we open our console here, press F12 and go to console, we'll notice it's telling us that we have a change at the field that's called post author. Here we have a change at post title, and it's showing us its value, but we're still not updating our state. This value will not be submitted with our form. So let's work from here, and therefore I need to copy my state into a variable, and not just copy it, I need to spread it, because if I copy it and it has nested objects, they won't be updated. I'll just be updating the reference. So I'll copy it, I'll spread it, and then I'll spread the nested objects and update them. So const, I'll create a const for updated post form, and here I'll spread my states post form, so this state post form, and then inside of it I'll also create updated form element, and here it's capital P, and this form element is actually taking from my updated post form the one with the input identifier. So it will take, so I'm spreading my updated post form at input identifier. From there, I'll update the value inside my updated form element. So updated form element value, and it will take the value of my event target. So the value here will be copied into my updated form element. So event target value. Afterward, I'll update the individual element in my post form. It will take the value of my updated form element, and therefore updated post form at input identifier. And this input identifier is therefore, as we can see, either post author, post title, post body. So I'll take this and put in it my updated form element, which was updated with the event target value. And finally, I'll update my state. So this set state, that's how we update the state. I'll take post form and updated post form. So inside post form, I'll put my new updated post form, which was spread to avoid shallow copying. If I change inside these, I have no errors, and they're updating the value. Now my form isn't complete. I have these three fields. I still need a submit button, and I need a method to submit accordingly. So after this map, after mapping the elements inside my form elements array, I'll create a button. So here I'll use button. Depending on your editor, it might automatically load the Material UI button, or you might import it yourself, and you can use a normal button. But anyway, I'll stick to material UI, and I'm importing button from material UI core button. And if I save now, I have a button. It's an empty button for now. Let's type inside it post it, and I can see the button here. It needs some styling, so I'll take a look at the material UI buttons. We have these are contained, and I'll disable the elevation for my button. So let's choose variant equals contained. I'll choose the primary color, and here it's a bit different from the default since I'm using this theme. It will change with my theme, so color primary, and I can see it starting to take shape. I'll also use the disabled elevation, so I'll type disable elevation. I'll add some styling as well, so style equals float right, and I want it therefore to be on the right side. Margin, I'll set it to -8, and this button will submit the form, and therefore it's of type equal submit. You've probably noticed that I had a submit method here which I've removed. I'll re-add it now. So this is the button positioned properly. Maybe we can add some fun to it. So instead of using post it only, I'll also add a send icon, and I'll put a margin between the icon and the text. So margin left is 10 pixels. It's also a self-closing icon, it's self-closing component. I still need to import this icon. It doesn't know it by default. So again, I'm taking this icon from material UI, import send icon from material UI icons set. And here I have it, and it has this send icon as well. This button does nothing for now. It's refreshing the page because it's of type submit, and whenever I submit, the default React action is to refresh the page. So we don't want this to happen. In fact, I want my form on submit to take some method. So on submit, I will use this dot message submit handler. And here, just like I created an input changed handler, I'll create a message submit handler. This will take an event. The event is where I submitted. It's the form where I'm submitting. So here, the first thing that I should do is using event.prevent default. That's to prevent the default action, which is loading, which is reloading. And now if I click it, it doesn't reload. And I'll add a part to my state, which is loading. And here I'll set it to false. Loading will be used to show a spinner when I'm loading some stuff or when I'm submitting stuff to my server. So loading is by default false. I'll set it to true when I click on this button. So this dot set state, I'll set loading to true, and then I'll create a form data that I want to submit. Inside this data, I'll copy these values to submit them, the author, title, and body, and I'll also add timestamps. So I'll create const form data, and here it's initially an empty object, and I'll take the elements in the post form and add them to this form data. So for let form element identifier in this state.post form. So I'm spanning over every element. This is like for each. And here I'm taking these elements and I'm giving them the name that I have here. That's post body, post title, or post author. And I'll copy only the value into my form that I'm gonna submit, because the rest doesn't matter. I don't need to submit the label, placeholder, and helper text. I just need to submit my value, to submit what's in there. So I'll take the post inside the post form in my state. I also take form element identifier and copy the value only. I'll also add the timestamp, so const created post, the post that I'm gonna submit at the end will have time, which is the current date. So I'm adding my current date. I can also calculate this on the server. It will be a more secure option. But for now, I'm not working with the backend. And I'm gonna add post data, which is my form data. So I'm taking my form data, putting it as post data, and I'm adding a timestamp. I log it to my console just to see what I created before sending it to my backend, before sending it to my server. So I'll press F12 and name post body text, and I type post. This gave me an error, so let's check what's wrong. It seems to be a typing mistake. I've typed from here instead of for. Again, name, title, body, and posting it. I can see it's showing my timestamp and my post data. So I'm ready to send it to my server. I'm gonna use Axios to send it to the server. You can also use the normal HTTP requests. You don't need to use a library. But since I'm using Axios, I've set a file called Axios Firebase, which contains my base URL. It will contain the URL of your backend, and I'm just gonna append to it according to the way we use Firebase /posts.json, and I'll configure Firebase accordingly. I won't explain that. If you're interested, we can discuss it in the comments, but since I'm focusing on React, I won't show it in the video. Anyway, you have to post it to the URL that's designated by your backend. So I've since I have my base URL already set in this file, I just use axios.post, and here I'll add posts.json. I don't need to type the full URL, therefore, and I need to import accordingly Axios from the file that I have here, not the default Axios file, because the default Axios file doesn't have our configured URL, and therefore I'm importing from going upward Axios Firebase. So you have to import this from wherever you have your Axios set. Of course, you can post using any other method. It's about how you're comfortable accessing your backend. And since Axios post is a promise, it will return a then when it's successful, and it will return a catch if it fails. So if it is successful, I will receive a response, and when I receive this response, I'll set my loading state to false, so I'll stop displaying my spinner. Loading false. And I will redirect to another page to see my post. So I'm gonna push into my history, this props.history.push, I'm gonna push to /post. So I'm going to localhost /posts, and I've already set my router in a previous video to take me to the page called posts whenever I have /posts in my URL. So that's if I received a successful response. If I receive an error, if I have an error, I'm gonna also set my state to false, my loading state to false. And I'm gonna log this error in the console, so console log error. Now I still need to show the loading spinner when I'm posting. So it's not enough, this is not enough. In fact, I will check if my loading state is true. If my loading state is true, I'll load a spinner. So before returning here, after creating the form, the default form, I'll check if this.state.loading. That's checking if it's true. If it is loading, I load inside my form a div. So I have div. Inside this div, I'll create the circular progress spinner from Material UI. You can create your own CSS spinner, but since this one's ready, I'm gonna use it. It also imported it, and I'm gonna use the other way of importing, that is from Material UI /core circular progress. And now let's call this dummy name. We can of course disable the console logs here, so just to keep our console brief. So I've disabled the console log. This is called username, post title, and body text. This should be relatively long, and I'm posting it. This is loading and it displayed the spinner, and if I go to posts, I'll see it here at the end. So apparently it's stored in my backend. Now maybe I can add some styling. I'll center it, so I'll use some inline styling, style equals, and here I'll use margin top set to 10%, so to leave some space. I'll set the display to flex. The flex direction is column. I'll also align items center and justify content center. And now if I go to add posts, another post, this is another short post, and I post it. My spinner is at the center and I have it here at the end. So in this video we saw how to create a form from the state in React. We also saw how to submit it, how to handle its changes, and how to show a loading spinner while it submits. Thanks for watching.